On behalf of Salina Media Connection and myself, Joyce Volk-Suenram, welcome and thank you both for being here. We appreciate your willingness to run for office and participate in public conversations. Representative Clarke Sanders is our Republican incumbent for District 69 since winning his seat in 2021, correct?
Actually won in November of 2020, began serving in January of 2021.
Got it. Clarke currently serves as Vice Chair on the House Committee on Higher Education Budget.
Yes.
Lori Blake is running against Clarke on the Democratic ticket. This is Lori's first run for public office.
At the state level.
At the state level.
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Yes.
We have prepared a series of questions that we feel covers a number of important topics facing our state and our communities. Our goal with you both is an easy conversation that allows each candidate to share their ideas and their thoughts. We will alternate between Lori and Clarke. For first responses, we are committed to not keeping you for more than an hour. If our time runs short before we have a chance to get through all 12 questions, we will allow you time for closing thoughts before we end. And as an intro to the conversation, Lori, you go first. Please give us a bit of background on your relationships with Salina and Saline County.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised here in Salina. Actually, I've lived here my whole life other than 4 years when I was out of state with my parents and then in college at Bethany College in Lindsborg. So my husband and I chose to make this home. We raised our 3 children here. I've worked in Salina my entire career in human services, and I served for 13 years on the school board of Southeast Saline, and that was my first dip into public service, but it was a nonpartisan situation there.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Clarke?
Born and raised in St. Louis, grew up in Kansas City, Wichita, and Chicago suburbs. Moved back to Kansas in 1978 to Dodge City to take a job at a radio station there. Came to Salina in 1985 to go to work for KSAL as the operations manager. And so since 1985, I've been in Salina, except for a year when I was up in Yankton, South Dakota. And most of that time at KSAL. So, and originally ran for state office in '92, won the primary, lost the general, lost in a primary for Senate in 2000. God was telling me, son, you got kids at home, you don't need to be doing this just now. And then when I retired full-time from the radio in April of 2020, then I thought, well, I'll give politics another shot, and had a successful campaign, and have been serving since January of 2021.
And I know that politics has been a passion of yours.
Yes, I hosted a political talk show on KSAL that a lot of people are familiar with called Friendly Fire. Did that for 22 years with various co-hosts, and so it was kind of interesting because when you're yapping on the radio about why are they doing this or that in Topeka, and then you get to Topeka, oh, so that's why they do it this way. But still, there are other things that I still don't, to this day, after 4 years, don't understand why we do what we do sometimes.
Well, let's talk about why we do what we do a little bit, okay? So first question, and thank you both. What are the most important issues that you feel need to be addressed in the next legislative session? And I'm going to have Clarke go first.
Okay, so taxes. We did get some movement on tax policy this past session, but not nearly enough. And we need to reduce property taxes. And so the governor, meanwhile, recently told the Kansas State Collegian, the college newspaper, that, quote, I'm asking legislators to hold off on making any more tax cut proposals until we experience the full impact of what we did last year and the full impact of total elimination of food sales tax. So I think maybe legislative session of 26, we can look and see how the numbers are and whether or not we can address leftover issues. Well, the fact of the matter is we don't need to wait till 2026. We need to do something now. And the reason I'm confident in saying that is there are projections, which of course the budget is based on, and just over the last few months, in June, our revenues from taxes were $24 million over projections. Now in July, it was actually $6.4 million below projections, but another 23 million over projections in August and 8 million over in September. So you add all that up, and over that 4-month period, we are $48.6 million over projections. We have a budget. We need to live within that budget. And when you're, almost $50 million over projections, some of that money needs to go back to the Kansas taxpayers. And the thing that I think people want the most as far as tax reduction is in property tax. Now, property taxes are generally taken care of at the city and county level, but the state still has 19.5 mills. We wanted to reduce it, we the Republicans wanted to reduce it down to 16 mills. We tried, because we knew the governor wouldn't accept that, to reduce it to 18 mills. She vetoed that, and she finally accepted a half a mill. So we reduced it to 19.5 mills. Regardless of what the governor thinks we could or should do, there are plans right now, and one of the early things that's going to happen in the next legislative session is we're going to pass additional property tax relief, and she's going to veto it. And the only way that there's any chance of that actually happening is to get a veto override. And I promise you that I will vote for that veto override, and I don't know what Lori's position on that is, but that's if we're going to get property tax reduction in 2025, it's got to be via veto override.
Thank you. Lori?
Well, I don't disagree that our tax levies are high in our state. At the state level, when we look at the mill levy that was reduced from 20 to 19.5, I have concerns about that because that's what equalizes the funding base for public education across our state. And so by eliminating that half a mill, that puts the burden back on local decision makers in order to have to evaluate and figure out where that money comes from in their general fund budget. 40% of property taxes are levied by schools in our state, and 25% of that is for their general funds, and 13.85% of that is for what's called the local option budget. 28% is levied by counties, and then another 17% by cities. So you will hear from the State House a lot that we don't have a lot of control over property tax, and that the reality is that's true, except that we did have a lever that was the LAV TRF, which is the local ad valorem tax reduction fund. And that was a lever that the legislature had to use to send money back to local taxing entities. And this year that was eliminated. So no longer do we even have that as a tool. So that's something I think that needs to be evaluated. I think we also need to look at the fact that we have this mill levy situation and opportunity across the state for sales taxes, or for property taxes. I think we also need to look at the incentives and the exemptions that have been granted currently to see if they're working for us. I don't have the answers on that. I don't claim to be an expert in tax revenue, but it is something that I will work to learn. I do understand school budgets and the impact of the state's assessments, and that mill levy serves a very important purpose. I think if we get too far out of whack, we're going to be back into a lawsuit saying that we're not meeting the basic needs of the funding formula that's been approved by our Supreme Court. And so I think that that's a whole balancing act, and that's the role of the legislature is to look at that and figure out, how do we meet the laws and the needs of our citizens. And one of the laws that we're not meeting currently is the special education funding. There was $75 million that was put towards that 92% statutorily rate this year, and that got us up to about 75% instead of less than that. But there's no direct promise of what that amount looks like moving forward. Now, there is maintenance of effort, and so we have to meet maintenance of effort. So in theory, that $75 million will continue. But as we look at building that budget for the next year, special education funding, when we fund that impacts schools in a really positive way, because that's non-negotiable. It's a federal mandate that schools have to fund their special education services. And so those dollars then come out of the general fund, which means they have to increase the local levy. So you can see that it's a very complex issue that we need to have conversations about and what that right balance is for homeowners in our state.
Got it. Thank you.
The legislation that added $75 million to special education was written in such a way that that money will not only stay, but it will be increased year in and year out for the foreseeable future. And so that's going to stay. Relative to the ad valorem, it's true that that was eliminated this past session, but the state hadn't paid that money out in years.
Right.
So even though that was a tool, it hadn't been utilized in forever, and we just finally, again, getting back to why do we do what we do? Why do we say we have this and then we don't ever pay it? So we got around to eliminating it. But let me understand, are you in favor of reducing property taxes at the state level, and the governor vetoes such a bill? Would you override the veto?
I don't have enough information. It will depend upon what's presented. If it's a reduction of the current 19.5 mills, I would say no, I'm not in favor of that, because that will impact our public schools, and it's going to come back then on our local taxpayers that are already footing the bill for those issues. If we have a $50 million surplus in our budget.
That's just in the last 4 months.
Yeah. So if we have a surplus, then how can we utilize that to maintain what our schools need, as well as find solutions together instead of being this partisan politics? And you've had a supermajority in the House and in the Senate. You've had the ability to do that work. So you talk about Governor Kelly vetoing those issues, but the reality is the Republicans are there, and the Republicans have had that ability, and it hasn't happened yet, Clarke.
Well, we haven't had a working supermajority, and I think you're well aware of that there have been 2 or 3 Republicans that tend to not vote with the Republican Party. It sounds like you're going to vote with the Democrats, which, you know,
I will not make that
would.
commitment. I will make a commitment to represent Salina and Saline County.
Okay.
Good. All right. Good conversation.
Yeah.
Kansas is currently operating with a $3 billion budget surplus. Do you believe state government should operate on a surplus, and where should our current surplus be invested? Laura, you first.
Okay, great. I think, again, we've got to look at where that surplus is coming from. So is it on the backs of corporations, or is it on the backs of local homeowners? And I would say that homeowners are carrying the burden currently in our economy, and the middle class is really dealing with that. And so I think we've got to look at how we invest those resources for children and families. I'll give you an example. At CAPS, where I worked the last 9 years, we had a wonderful partnership with the Department for Children and Families that was funded 50% by the state, and 50% by the federal government. And the goal of that was to keep families together. So it's a prevention-based program that targeted children who had been identified at risk of having removal from their parents' homes. And instead of removing them, which is the most costly thing we can do, not only financially, but for the future of our state, that degrades our family structures and it degrades the mental well-being of our children and our families. So instead of investing this expensive response, we wrapped services around the children and families, and we got them the assessment of how did you get here, and what do you need to keep that family together? And in 4 years under that grant program, we reduced the number of children who were removed by 50% in Saline County. So I think when we invest resources like that into our children and our families, they can pay their mortgage. They can go to work every day. They can pay for childcare. Those things have to happen in order for our economy to work. And we saw what happened during COVID when we didn't have women in the workforce because they had to stay home and take care of their children. And so I think that looking at those family supports is where I would begin.
Got it. Thank you. Clarke?
Most of that surplus, or a lot of it, came from money that we received from the federal government following COVID, money that has yet to be spent. It's ridiculous to be operating with a $3 billion surplus. The people of Kansas should have that money, not the government.
So none of that. So what percentage of the $3 billion do you think is not COVID money? Because you were saying our sales tax is way above where we projections, and so what percentage of that
revenues,
tax revenues? So what percentage of that do you think is
I'd
from
say,
Kansas, not the federal government?
Less than half.
Okay. But it's still a lot. Less than half.
Yeah,
It's still,
no.
like,
It's a
you know,
bunch.
still a lot of money.
It's
So
still
absolutely.
a lot of money, but,
okay.
But you know, one of the things that we did do with some of that COVID money was we put it in what we call the rainy day fund.
Right.
And which was, I think, a wise thing to do.
Sure.
So why don't we reduce taxes? And if there are problems, we've got a ton of money in the rainy day fund now, and we can make up, if necessary, from that fund.
Okay, I like it. Okay. Flat tax comes up in virtually every election year conversation. Do you believe a flat tax on net income for both personal and business will work for Kansas? Why or why not?
I don't think so. There is, plus, aside from that, there's really no will that I sense in the legislature for passing some kind of a flat tax. There are people who champion it in Topeka, which is another thing that's kind of an interesting thing. Oh, the Kansas legislature is considering such and such. A lot of times when you hear that reported, the legislature is not considering whatever. There's one or two guys that are considering something and that they want something done, and so they bring a proposal and then it gets reported. But flat tax, I don't think that's the way to go now.
Okay, Lori?
I would agree. The two votes that came before the legislature this year that Clarke voted for, and the override, the veto override that he voted for, top 5% of our wage earners receive 50% of the benefit from that tax cut. So the top 5% of our wage earners in the state receive 50% of that concept. That's not equitable. It's not taking care of our working class people who are out here taking care of our personal needs, you know, in service industries and, you know, keeping the economy going. So I would not be in favor of that. I was on the school board under the Stan Brownback administration, which was a terrible, failed experiment in our economy in the state of Kansas. And I never want to go back to that mentality again. It was terrible for schools. I mean, not only personally as individuals in our state, but all public services suffered under that.
So
that
people
philosophy.
who have a lot of money, not always, but generally, have businesses. And why you want to punish job creators is a mystery to me.
I don't want to punish job creators, Clarke. I want to work together, and I want to leverage private, local, state, and federal resources to best meet the needs of our community, and I want to represent them in Topeka and not just vote a party line.
Thank you. A recent effort by Kansas Republicans would overhaul the state's budget process. Do you think the governor or the legislature should start the budgeting process?
I think it should be a collaborative effort. You know, I've been a part of that budgeting process at the school board level. I'm the treasurer at our church. It's a collaborative effort between our committees and our leadership. At CAPS, it was a collaborative effort. We get resources from the state, from the local, from the donors in our community. Like, you have to look at all of those things, and I think whoever is in leadership needs to come to the table together. I don't think that you can do that effectively in a single leg per se. And so I'm intrigued by this idea of starting the process. Come together, let's look at different ideas, and let's figure out what's best for Kansans.
Well, the budget is a collaborative effort. It does start with the governor, but nothing's going to happen until the legislature approves the budget.
Right.
And I think that, I mean, I'm not real enamored with this particular governor, but the concept of the governor starting the budget process, I think, is a good one, because after all, it's easier for one person to throw out a proposal than to try to get 165 legislators to agree on a budget from the get-go. And so I like the concept of that and would not be in favor of changing it.
So this committee work that's taking place currently outside of the session is not something you're in favor of?
I don't think so. I would want to keep my powder a little bit dry to see what they finally come up with.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch, I think.
Well, and let me throw this at you too. I'm fascinated by even the discussion of it, because the legislature takes that budget and does what they want to with it.
Exactly.
And so that's why
it is a collaborative effort in the end, but it's got to start somewhere.
But what's interesting is that if she presents it, then it's, if our governor presents it, then it seems to be a little bit more, I don't know what the word is, litigious. You know what I'm saying? It's just automatically it's her budget, so let's fight her on this budget instead of everybody just working together. Because honestly, you're just going to take the pieces and parts that you want out of it anyway. So I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting introduction.
She is tasked with supervising the administration and the State departments. And so she's getting that information from the practitioners.
Right.
She's getting that information. That is a collaborative process already. I'm certain of that. But we've got to figure out how to come to the table together and not have it be about the letter behind our name.
Right. Thank you. Here we go. Early childhood education has been at the forefront of successful high school outcomes in the last few years as nonprofits and school districts stress the importance of school readiness for all kindergarten students. Kansas has provided grants and specific criteria for developing preschool programs in Kansas communities. Do you think preschool should be completely state funded for all preschool age children and not just those at-risk children?
Absolutely not. I do not believe that that should be on the shoulder of taxpayers. We do have families that have the ability to pay. And so the way that's working right now, it is an at-risk indicator for that funding. It's not 100% funded. I think that that is appropriate. It allows the flexibility for families. The reality is that parents are the first teacher. And until that brain development has completed and through that whole process, parents have to be a part of that decision. I think that private preschools are doing a fine job of that. And so to keep public resources for those that do not have the resources on their own would certainly be an angle that I would support.
Thank you. Clarke?
I agree with, I think, basically all of that. Yeah. So welcome to the Republican Party.
Let's not lose our minds here.
Just remember, Clarke, I've been unaffiliated for the last 13 years. It's really not about a party for me.
Why are you a Democrat now?
Because I have watched how the party has operated, and I've listened to what you have told me, which is you don't have a voice in the legislature because your speaker and your Senate president set the agenda. And if you don't follow line, there are consequences.
So you don't think that's true of the Democrats?
I don't know. I haven't heard that same line from them. They haven't been in a majority situation. So I also knew that I needed time to get out and meet with the voters. I didn't think I could get elected in a primary in Saline County where we have 16% of the population or the registered voters that show up at a primary. So I want to do the work. I want to meet with people, and I want to represent our community.
Thank you. Quick follow-up question. What are your thoughts on funding for private schools, government funding for private school educations? Clarke?
I think we should fund what's best for the students. And in some situations, what's best for the students is a private school situation. They obviously need to be accredited, but I'm a longtime supporter of, for whatever reason, the word voucher went out of vogue a few years ago, and so now we call it, educational tax credits or something. But I believe that parents should have an ability to direct some of their money into private schools.
Okay, thank you. Lori?
And I am on the other side of the fence on that issue, particularly as an educational advocate through the Disability Supports Organization. I sat at tables in those private institutions and I listened to educators discriminate against the needs of those children. And I cannot, in goodwill, think that it's a good idea for our private dollars to go to an institution that don't have to meet the same standards as our state-funded schools, and that they have the ability to discriminate against people and say, no, we're not going to serve you. We're not going to educate your child because you don't meet whatever the standard or the philosophy of our institution. And so public education is in place to remove those inequities in our society. Kids don't get to pick who their parents are. Kids don't get to pick where they go to school. That's a parent's decision. And so providing the very best public education possible is what I've always been about. And I believe that that's what our country is founded on, that freedom of that lens. And I think when we start saying we're going to send dollars, we talk about indoctrination. I've been hearing that word a lot in the last 2 to 3 years. And that's private institutions are following a certain value set, which is fine. If parents want that for their child, pay for it. That is fine. But public education is the great equalizer in our society, and I think that our tax dollars need to remain in a public setting.
Okay, thank you. What do you think the top 3 things Kansas families need from our state government to be more financially and emotionally secure in our current economy?
They need access to high-quality child care and figuring out ways like we have in Salina to incentivize people to enter that field. I think we're a great example of what happens when private dollars come together with local, state, and federal funding. And so using a model like that where private investors are helping increase the wages of child care workers, and where we are applying for state grants. So it's still that local control. That's one thing I learned in my service on the local school board is local people know their community best. And so for us to have resources from the state that we competitively apply for and that there's some state oversight to, but that local people can utilize, I think, is something that needs to take place across the state. And if we have a $3 billion surplus, I know some of those COVID dollars did go into child care because Saline County did benefit from that. The United Way used some of the Saline County dollars to help stabilize that particular profession in our community. In addition, we've got to figure out something about affordable housing. We right now have not enough houses for the work that we have to do here. And so we have this great statewide campaign by the Department of Commerce that's Love Kansas, and that we're saying, come back, live here, work here. We want to keep our Kansas educated people here. We want that to happen. And so with some people that are here are like, well, I'm here. I'm like, yes, and there's still more jobs than what we have workers for. And so there's got to be some kind of a similar solution, I think, for housing in order to make that attractive to people, because people leave because they can't find high-paying jobs, and they leave because they can't find places to live, and they don't have children. Like literally, we've had this conversation with mothers and fathers in this community. They are not having children because they cannot find childcare for their children.
Or it's not affordable.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go in the state of Kansas, and I've talked to people from all over the state, the 3 biggest issues around the state are workforce, not enough, especially in education, especially in medical, nursing. There's not enough workforce in the state of Kansas. There's not enough affordable housing, and it's kind of interesting. Everybody struggles with the definition of what is affordable
housing.
Because obviously what's affordable to one person isn't necessarily affordable to another. And then childcare, affordable childcare. Those are the 3 big issues across the state. Now, in addition to that, what I think needs to happen is we've got to have a major push for reliable rural broadband. More people will come to the state of Kansas if they know they can live, quote unquote, out in the middle of nowhere and work from home because they've got good internet service.
And that's happening right now, isn't it, Clarke? Wasn't there a $10 million grant that was just awarded?
It's happening.
It's in process.
It's in process, but if you would see the map of the state of Kansas.
Oh, yeah, it's massive.
Of where there is not reliable internet. And, you know, I don't get it because I'm not astute enough, I guess, or savvy enough to know these things. But I don't know why this can't be solved with satellites. It seems to me that it could be, but apparently not. We need wired.
It could.
And so, at any rate,
could.
however we're going to do it, we need to get this done because it'll attract more people to the state of Kansas. And we're in a tough situation. Our current population is approximately 2.9 million people. In order to qualify for a federal representative to go to Washington, you need 750,000 for one. So we're technically, right now, we're less than 3 million. And if we don't see an increase in population by the time the next census rolls around in 2030, we're going to lose a federal seat. And I would hate to see that happen.
Absolutely. Gun violence continues to plague our nation. Senator Clay's recently introduced Senate Bill 8. I believe that'll be introduced this next session. That would eliminate sales tax on firearms, ammunition, accessories, and firearm storage devices. Discussion will start in the next legislative session. Does this make sense for Kansas citizens, or is it just a good faith gesture toward the NRA?
So the situation, is it my turn?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm
absolutely.
sorry.
No, we're good.
No, I think it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So gun violence is an interesting term. Violent people use guns. A gun is an inanimate object. Mm-hmm. The problem with the quote-unquote gun crisis is a mental health problem. Why do so many, relatively speaking, people want to use guns in a bad way? And that's what we got to deal with. If you do things that focus on the gun, you're never going to solve the problem. The problem is not the gun. The problem is the people.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my husband is a federal firearms licensed dealer in Assyria, Kansas, and he does special order things for customers. And I concur with what Clarke is saying about the weapon itself. We believe that education is the key to, first of all, equipping the right people for possession. We have to take a test in order to drive a vehicle, for instance. Why do we not require that for gun owners? It's just a question. I'm not saying that that's something I necessarily would advocate for, but education certainly is where it starts. We don't have any kind of protections for whistleblowers or the red alert that could happen when a family member or somebody in the community recognizes that this person is not mentally stable right now, and if they are gun owners, what does that mean? What are the implications? Right. We don't know who owns all of the guns in our country, and so it is a very complex situation. But I think that the personal responsibility of gun ownership and our state's role in recognizing that it's probably not in the best interest of anyone to just say, if you're over the age of 21, you can legally conceal carry.
But so the actual question before that, thank you both.
Yeah.
But would you be in favor of a sales tax exemption for gun sales?
Absolutely not.
I'd be good with it. I'm for reducing taxes, period.
Got it. This is a big one. You guys ready? Why haven't we expanded Medicaid in Kansas, and what are the actual financial implications of that? Lori?
I don't know the financial implications because we haven't had a full hearing. Now, there was an hour in a committee this spring that there was very limited dialogue. But I would be in favor of actually having a hearing on the floor, having the information presented. It's been, like Clarke has said to me on repeated occasion, our Speaker of the House and our Senate President have been blocking that debate. Everyone I talk to, like in the business world, in the medical field, recognize the value of this expansion. Clarke has said that this reduces 18 to 60-year-old able-bodied employees, that it would inhibit them from participating in the workforce, which is not true at all. If you look at
I've never said anything like that. I've said that Medicaid expansion, the population that it would be expanded to would be 19 to 60 years old. But I've never talked about how it would inhibit them from work.
I must have misinterpreted the statement that I read in the Salina Journal this last week. So what I have experienced in working with children and families is these are service providers that are earning between $10 and $18 an hour. There are child care workers that would qualify for that kind of assistance and that kind of support. And if they don't have the burden of the medical premium for insurance that their children can receive, the health care that they need, that's going to stimulate our economy. When our local practices, so whether that's a clinic or the hospital, when they have a source for reimbursement, that takes off the private donor's ability, or that's got to be absorbed somewhere. And so you and I, when we're paying our doctor visit rates, are being impacted by these uninsured families in our community. And so I absolutely am in favor of the discussion. I want to know what the financial implication is. I haven't seen that published anywhere because we haven't been able to actually do the work.
And all we have is generalities at this point. So, Clarke, what do you think?
So there were actually 2 days of hearings in the Kansas House on this past session, not just an hour. And I believe the Senate also had a hearing on it, so it is being discussed. It has been discussed. And the fact of the matter is that there are 13 vulnerable populations already covered by Medicaid. This would add 140 to 150,000 19 to 60-year-old able-bodied Kansans to the Medicaid rolls. This would mean that people who are truly in need of the services would get pushed back further in line, and there already is a line. And we don't know what it would cost. Everybody says, oh, we're leaving all these federal tax dollars on the table, but the federal government doesn't pay for all of it. There's a cost to Kansans, and who knows what that would be. The federal government will tell you one thing, and then when the reality settles in, it's almost always higher. And so that money that we would pay at the state level is going to come out of the education budget or the special education. It's got to come from somewhere.
How about the $3 billion surplus?
Well, some of it will come from there, but that is, not going to be around forever either. And so the discussion is underway. We don't know what it would cost. We do know that it would cost something. Something significant. And I'm not in favor of it.
But do we have the data to evaluate the absolute total impact on the state's healthcare system if we have more people that are insured and they're not in emergency rooms and we're not writing that money off, and we actually have people going to clinics and doing preventative care because now they do have insurance and they absolutely can't afford it. Affordable Care Act. They fell between the cracks of that one as well because they couldn't afford any of the options that were out there. But do we have that information to really make a good decision?
If we do, I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Okay. Got it. Next. All right. Do you support the state's efforts to bring the Kansas City Chiefs to Kansas with star bonds? Why or why not?
No, I don't. The Chiefs have hired 27 lobbyists to try to get this done. 27 lobbyists from Kansas. The Royals have hired another 8. So there's 35 lobbyists working on this to move one or the other or both of them. Missouri will move heaven and earth before they would allow the Chiefs to come over the border. The place they normally talk about is out by the Legends, out by the racetrack. Well, why would the Royals go there? They want a stadium downtown. They don't want to come there. The Chiefs might come there, but they won't. The fact of the matter is they won't. And the Chiefs aren't going anywhere. They may move out of Arrowhead, but they're not coming to Kansas. And so no, I don't support it. It's going to cost a lot more than star bonds to make that happen. You know that it is. And so, no, I don't support it.
I found it very interesting how fast we were able to make that happen as an opportunity this session. When we have issues like Medicaid expansion that have been an opportunity for 11 years that we've not given voice to. And that was very disheartening to me, that we're looking at a economic developing opportunity. That was the lens. I recently read, I think $280,000 was spent by lobbyists. I think that's what the lobby report showed, by those lobbyists since January for that specific issue. It's just, I'm running for this seat to impact our local economy. I'm not sure how that will trickle out to Saline County. I don't think it probably will. I don't know that it's in Saline County's best interest, but I would want to study the information. It's not something I've had access to.
Thank you.
42 Republicans voted against that proposal. I'm not sure how many Democrats. I'm sure there must have been some. So it's not close.
Well,
I think Salina's Star Bond District is an example of what those bonds were intended for.
correct, and also I don't know that we've ever had a number from this particular issue, how much of that money will be private money versus public money.
And
Salina is just an amazing community where we have taken private and public and just done miraculous things with the Star Bonds. And that's where it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, it's kind of funny, ironic, if you will, that one year we're up there having a conversation about doing away with Star Bonds, period.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know,
We need that
come-
lever.
we need the
lever.
Chiefs and the Royals, one or the other or both, to come to Kansas and say, oh, Star Bonds. That way it won't cost the taxpayers anything. Well, if you believe that, I've got some prime real estate I'd like to talk to you about.
I like this next question because this is, in my business in insurance and investments and helping families plan for retirement and, you know, what can happen. This comes up time and time again in a rural community. But agriculture is the largest economic driver in Kansas. The average age of Kansas farmers is 58.2. Just over a quarter of Kansas farmers are between the ages of 65 and 74.
say that again.
Just over a quarter of Kansas farmers are between the ages of 65 and 74,
Thank you.
right? So we're ready to start retiring. We're getting to the age now. We can't manage everything that we've done. How can the state of Kansas prepare to support young farmers in the next decade when logistics and tax implications of transferring family operations has become so incredibly complicated at the federal level regarding taxation?
I've got a lot of learning to do on this issue. It's not something I have direct experience with outside of a sale in our family that took place recently, and that was within the family, and it was complicated. It took 5 years to make it happen. So that seems a little crazy that it took that long. But again, I would have to study that more, to learn more, and would appreciate guidance on it.
I don't know the answer to your question either. I will tell you this. My wife was raised on a farm, and her dad supported the 4 children and his wife and himself on a quarter section. Now, that is not a reality in the 2020s, and it hadn't been a reality for a long time. Farm sizes are growing bigger. I also know this, there's a lot of technology in the works, and some of it has come to fruition, where you can have, you know, one time I heard about, in fact, I think we have them, driverless tractors.
Yes.
Yep, it's coming.
But take it a step further, what you may not know is there's also technology in the works for driverless implements. So you won't need a tractor to pull a plow or to pull a planter. There's technology where it can be self-contained. I mean, can you imagine that? Having a farm without a tractor, but it's on the horizon. And the thing of it is, that kind of technology needs to be on the horizon because farms are growing bigger. There's a lot more acreage. The quote-unquote family farm is a thing of the past. And as laudable as it might be to try to get younger people to come back to the farm, well, in a lot of cases, they don't want to come back to the farm. But I just, that's one of those things that if there was a way that made sense, I could be supportive of it, but I don't see what that way is at the moment, especially the way the farming industry is going.
I was really, really surprised when I was looking at the percentages of where our property valuation comes from, that in the state of Kansas, only 5.67% actually comes from ag land. That was shocking to me because of where we live and what we do. And so that was a little star that I put by that I thought I need to learn more about this. So
it's really with capital gains and with other issues, passing on these farms is virtually unaffordable. The debt you would have to take on, the ground you would have to sell to be able to afford to pass that acreage on is just sometimes it's insurmountable for families to try to manage. If you want your kids to continue the business,
Right.
It's so incredibly expensive, and with rising inputs and all the other issues that we have today, and
Exactly.
climate change,
How
are we going to support them?
How is a young person going to afford to buy the implements that they need?
yeah.
I mean, we've paths would be a good thing if we
Yeah.
could make that easier. But that's not the reality of the way the agricultural business is going.
But do we really want corporate farming? Do we
Well,
really want to? Do we want a few to control all of our food sources and food streams? Right.
That's a
it's
scary-
that whole.
It's the same
It's a
thing as
scary
what's
thought.
taking place in the grocery market right
Yes.
now, and the
Yes.
dialogue that's taking place about two major corporations coming together that's going to control that source. I mean, that's monopoly land, and that does not sound like a good idea.
And this is actually our last question, and then we'll do the closing. So good job, you guys. If elected, how do you plan to be present, visible, and involved in your community with 7 months not spent in Topeka? Clarke.
I get a kick out of the fact that I'll be down at the YMCA in August, and people say, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like,
It's not a school year.
well, I live here. That's for sure. So what a lot of people don't realize, and a new session begins on the second Monday in January. That's mandated by the state constitution. It ends approximately April 30th, although generally there's
We
some
run over,
spillover
yeah.
into May. But from middle of May to the second Monday in January, we're not in session. And unless you're on an interim committee, and those, even the most active of the interim committees only meet 10, 12 times a year, we spend a lot more time out of session than in session. And that's a good thing. I mean, I've always made my cell phone number readily available to anybody who wants it. In fact, when I do my door-to-door, if there's nobody comes to the door, I leave a little Post-it note with my cell phone number on it. It's on my legislative page. So I'm happy to talk to anybody about anything at any time. And I try to get around to a lot of different things as a legislator. You get a lot of invitations. And, it's kind of interesting. As I said in my opening, I ran twice and didn't win. And it was amazing when you're running, like Lori is now, a lot of people are interested in, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And come election day, the day after election day, if you haven't won, nobody gives a damn about what you think about anything. It's a lot different than if you get elected. Then they care more than ever what you think about stuff. So I'm happy to tell anybody who wants to contact me, and there are various ways to do it, anything that they...
Because you're in Salina unless you're off seeing grandchildren
I take family
you're here. This
vacations.
is it, yeah.
I take a big baseball trip every year. I mean, but most of the year I'm in Salina.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I have been super engaged in this place, and I have no intent of doing anything differently outside of the session. I will say that if I am elected, I will be there. I will listen. I will expect communication and engagement. I will reach out to local resources when I don't have the answers and seek that. How is this going to impact you? As a school board member, I had a direct line to Stephen Johnson on the floor. We would be texting conversations back and forth about what was being considered if he had questions about that. And that was really what I'm looking for in a representative. I've texted Clarke a lot. I don't necessarily get a lot of dialogue back, but he is available.
Respond.
You always respond, not necessarily in a
Not in the way you'd like
problem.
to hear it, maybe.
No,
but
I mean, usually it's thank you for your input. And I want to be collaborative. I want to learn from people. I want to work together and actually solve problems. I do not believe our two-party system is serving us. And I think that we've got to break that mentality in order to actually change this place for the better.
then why are you a part of it? If it's not working, and you've been unaffiliated for 13 years, why did you become a part of it?
We got to start somewhere.
Okay.
We got to start somewhere, Clarke. And I can't start if I'm not at the table.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, closing thoughts.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
my whole life has been steeped in leadership. Every role that I've ever had I've landed in some kind of a leadership role, and I believe listening is why I have landed there. Is because I have an ability of recognizing I don't have all the answers, and I need another person's perspective. I need another person's experience in order to find a solution in the middle. I mean, that's the case for all of us. We just have one life, right? Mm-hmm. And so elevating that has been something I feel like I've been pretty gifted at doing, and working with diverse bodies of people. So, my leadership has been tested here. I made a very, very intentional choice to raise our family here and stay. I was living in Chicago when my husband and I were dating, and he said, you're going to have to figure out if this is home or not. He had already purchased the business that we operate, and so that was a very intentional choice. And one of my college professors, I'll never forget, he said, what a waste. What a waste that you're staying in this area, Kansas. And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean by that? He says, you could do so many things, Lori, and you're going to stay in a little town of 500 and do what? Mm-hmm. Well, I stayed in a little town of 500, and I led, and I lead, and that's just what I do. I serve people, I listen, and I think that work ethic is what we need.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Clarke?
So it's been a great honor to be the representative in the 69th District for the last 4 years. I would like to continue on that role. As you get up to Topeka and you learn about what's going on, you start to have more and more influence. And so 4 years ago, I was new and didn't have near as much influence as the previous representative, who was J.R. Clays. Of course, he's in the Senate now. But, my influence is starting to grow. If we elect somebody else, then they start from zero. And I'm going to be running for a leadership position should I get reelected. And I would certainly like the opportunity to do that. And, Lori's good people, and she's a good candidate. She's obviously researched a lot of the issues, but you can't possibly know about everything that you're going to need to be asked to decide on. And I got a good piece of advice before I ever got elected. And what this guy told me was, he was a legislator, he says, if you get elected, he said, what you need to do is you need to develop relationships with people up here who you trust, who are involved in various different things. And he said, for example, he was insurance. So he was the chairman of the insurance committee. So if you have questions about insurance, I'm the guy to talk to. And if you have questions about something else, find the people you know who are involved in that particular issue and talk to them about it. And that's very sound advice, and that's what I've tried to do and hope to continue to do.
Well, thanks, you guys. This was fun.
Sure.
Thank you.
I love
Appreciate
it. Thank you
Nice
so
job.
much.
Yeah.
Of course.
Good
No,
job.
I appreciate you guys so much, and good luck in November.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you're voting for me, vote November 5th. If you're voting for Lori, vote, but do it on November 6th. And you know,
I'm really
and
good
you know
say-
me.
I'm
you
really
know
good
me.
at keeping a calendar. I don't think I'm going to miss it.
You really know that I say that in jest.
Yes. I
course
just
I
say
do.
vote. Like that is the biggest thing. This apathy of not
Yeah.
participating.
It's
is
not-
nuts.
It's
not
hard,
good.
and it's hard
It's
for
not
me.
good.
It's hard for people who haven't been in a leadership position to understand why you don't vote. Why don't you take this opportunity?
Yeah.
It's not that hard to do a little research.
16%, which we had
It's
in the primary,
insane.
was
Yeah,
pitiful.
it's
And-
the craziest
and-
thing.
But you know, just real quick on this. So the turnout, because it's a presidential year, will be 65 to 75%. And we go, oh wow, that's great. It's not.
No, that's horrible. Of
90
registered voters
yeah,
or of the population?
Registered voters.
Yeah,
Of registered
and
voters.
there's plenty of unregistered voters.
Yeah.
99% would be great. 95% would be really good. But it's always puzzled me is people like city commissioners and county commissioners and state representatives and state senators and local school board members who will have a heck of a lot more impact on your life than who the president is. But yet people want to come out.
I was at a
And
door
vote.
last night, and the gentleman took my walk card, and he said, I don't even know if I'm going to vote this election. And I said, why not, sir? And he said, because I don't know that my voice matters in the national scene. And I said, well, I'm not here for that.
Yep.
I'm here for the state election. I can tell you our local elections impact you way more. So I would hope that you would
Exactly.
consider that.
Good point.
So
I love it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.